I'm a resident. I'm doing medicine, and most of my friends, probably because that's where I spend the majority of my time, are in that field, or in medicine. Debbie, I got to know her through residency, and we do a lot of activities together. We'll golf together. She's been at parties at my house, and I have quite a few parties where I'll mix, like my Christian friends will be there, my non-Christian friends will be there. And Debbie just shocked me one day on the golf course where she'll interject into a conversation. She'll distinct between, well, I'm one of your non-Christian friends, and she'll make a distinction between the two, and something that I wouldn't even have really known that she's necessarily recognized. And then she throws at me, I'm one of your friends who's going to hell. I feel a bit awkward, and I feel uncomfortable to know what exactly it is that she's given me an open door to say something, and I'm not exactly sure how to walk through that door.
Like Cheryl, perhaps you have some relationships where these individuals are ready to hear the gospel and you're not sure how to proceed. Well, today we're going to jump into our track called the Would You Like to Know God Personally? Now, some of these things may seem really awkward at first. And that's okay, it'll get easier over time. I love to play tennis. It's my favorite sport. And this past year I went to a camp where, as I was serving, I think I've got a great serve, the coach comes up and he says, I like your serve, it could be better. He says, you've got to put a little slice on it, just to mix it up a bit. And I thought, I'm not really good at that. And he says, here's what you do. And he showed me, and I practiced, and I was getting better at it. And the first game I went out and I thought, I'm going to try this. And I set it up, and it was like this big ball showing up on the other guy's court, and he just hammered at me. And I thought, this is terrible. But I stuck with it, and I kept practicing. And it's now one of the best parts of my game. Well, that's going to be the same thing with everything you're learning, including this track. It will take time. It will seem strange, but it will get better. Remember, the definition of successful witnessing and sharing the gospel is taking the initiative to share the gospel in the power of the Holy Spirit and leaving the results up to God. Let's get started on the right foot again by praying for our friends. Whenever you're sharing the gospel message with someone, using any kind of tool like the Would You Like to Know God Personally booklet, or the Romans Road, or 4 Spiritual Laws, any of these tools, here are a few things to keep in mind. As you're being sensitive to the individual you're sharing with, you need to also realize that Satan does not want you talking to them, let alone sharing the gospel message. And he's going to use a lot of means to try and distract you. One of these is to have the individual ask you questions that have nothing to do with what you're talking about. Distracting questions, humorous even. You want to defer these questions until later. Here's what I do. I'll say something like, that's an interesting question, but it may be answered in this booklet. But if not, could I come back to it later? Almost every single time they say, oh yeah, sure, we'll do that. As you're finishing up sharing the gospel message, be bold. Encourage the individual to pray to receive Christ. Now, this may seem pushy or aggressive, but that's only if it's done in your power. Done in the power of the Holy Spirit, you're showing initiative and sensitivity. When you ask them this question, let them respond. Don't rush to fill the gap of silence with your own noise. Let God work on their heart. Question I ask at this time very often is there any reason why you wouldn't want to begin a relationship with Christ at this point in time? It'll lead you both to a much deeper relationship and conversation. Finally, be sure to leave the little booklet with them. Why? Because it's spiritual dynamite. It can go off at any time. My roommate in university was Gary, and he told me when he was 16 years old that Athletes in Action came to his high school. They did a basketball clinic, and in between had life stories of some of the players. At the end of the time, they were handing out 4 spiritual law booklets. He took one, threw it in his backpack, and when he got home, put it in his drawer. 2 years later, he was packing for university. He was taking out his clothes, and he found the 4 spiritual laws booklet. He sat on his bed, read the booklet, and led himself to the Lord. Now that's power. As we're getting familiar with the Would You Like to Know God Personally track, I found that modeling helps a lot. I'm just going to summarize a few of the things we've talked about. First of all, with Jared and I here, I'm asking him if he'd like to go through it. So let's pick it up from the point where he's been asking about my life story, I've shared it with him, and now we're rolling to this point. Well, Jared, you know, that relationship I talked about with Jesus Christ, I really didn't know anything about it until someone explained to me 4 key things. 3 were more information, and 1 was an application point of how I could make this relationship real in my own life. It's really summarized in this booklet, Would You Like to Know God Personally? I'd love to go through it with you and just get your opinion. You might find it quite interesting. You into it?
Oh, sure.
All right, great. Well, from this point, I would open the booklet and I would guide the conversation. I'd have a pen and I'd just say, well, this booklet contains, and I'd start reading. Why? Well, if I give him a copy and myself a copy, you know what happens? As soon as you have something in your hands, you start flipping ahead. Oh yeah. And I'm on page 4 while Jared's reading page 11. And so there's no way that we can continue to just go through it together. And I'm listening to Jared as we're going through each process. So make sure that you're guiding. Another thing you could do is just fold the page back. Because if I'm opening it this way, he's already reading here while I'm reading here. It's just the nature of the beast. There are a few points in the book as well that we covered. Some of the tips. If you go to page 4, it's talking about the fact that people are sinful. And this is not a word that we're used to or that we use very often. But sin is really just a historical term. And so I tell them that. Jared, sin is a word that came from archery, and it was a measurement. If you didn't hit the perfect mark of the bullseye, it was sin 1, sin 2, sin 3. And people really enjoy hearing a little bit of history. Follow through, continue on, listening as you're going to the Holy Spirit particularly, but also to the other person. Another thing that I like to insist upon the person understanding is when we come to the 4th point on page 8. At this point, the individual is wondering about, well, how do I make this real? There's a verse that says, we receive Christ through faith. It's the bottom of page 8. And it says, for it is by grace you have been saved through faith. And this is not of yourselves, it's a free gift of God, not by works, so that no one can boast. I emphasize the fact that this is a gift. Now, by definition, in Webster's dictionary, a gift is something that must be received in order to be benefited from. So, in the same way, we may know that Jesus Christ is the Son of God, right? We may understand that, we really need him. But if we don't receive him into our lives, we don't have the benefit of him changing us and making us the people we want him to be. He wants us to be, I should say. Continue on through the booklet, just as it is, practice it, and it will become a very important part of your personal ministry. In time, you won't even need a booklet like this. You can share it verbatim or however it develops into your own style. The reason I do like a little booklet like this is because I can take it at the end and give it to Jared. And I may never see him again, maybe on a plane or some other situation, but he can take that away and read it on his own, and the Holy Spirit could use it to touch his heart and lead him to himself. On page 9 of your booklet, you're going to see 2 circles. And these circles are designed to help you understand and the person you're sharing with understand where they are in a spiritual sense. Under the circles are a couple of questions. The first question is, which circle best represents your life? Now, there are three possible answers. The first, of course, is that the person says, well, I'm on the left, signifying that they see themselves as not having Christ in their life. Simply move on to the next question and carry on. The second possible answer is that the individual looks at it and says, well, I'm sort of in between, or I'm both. This is often given by someone from a religious background and doesn't understand this relationship with Christ. Now, don't you get confused and distracted. Simply move on to the next question. The final possible answer is that the individual says, well, I'm on the right. I'm a Christian. Fantastic. Ask them about their life story, when they made that decision for Christ, and get to know them better. Share your life story with them as well. Then, go through the rest of the booklet with them and leave it with them so they can share it with other people. As you can see, sharing the gospel will definitely burst your bubble. The process has many key ingredients, including sensitive preparation and patience. The key is to be walking in the power of the Holy Spirit. You see, God will give you the wisdom and the insight to use these new skills in a way that will impact people every time. What I'd like you to do now is, as a group, review the 5 steps we've gone through and pick areas of weakness where you can continue to help one another. Perhaps you'd like to do the coaching exercise on life stories. Next week, we're going to jump into how do you follow up a brand new believer?